Watch this.
It doesn't inspire confidence to me when some of my questions that I've had and my concerns, well, we have a year to work out the problems.
After even more debate, lawmakers gave their final thoughts on the Fund Students Not Systems bill, and it came down to one vote.
We're not limited by the amount of plastic trash we have at the moment.
So what to do with those hard-to-recycle plastics? It's a challenge Boise State students and faculty are tackling as the mound of orange hefty bags continues to grow. America's first national park turns 150 years old today. Sure, the geysers are one of the go-tos at the park, but what about the lodge that looks over the most famous Old Faithful? We could celebrate that too. All right, the Fund Students Not Systems phrase, once again getting the focus at the Idaho State House. A bill modeled from that phrase looks to give state education funds to individual families to help them pay for education resources that fit their needs best. There's a major hang-up, though, from critics. The legislation allows Idaho tax dollars to be spent on things like private school tuition. It's been pointed out there's a good chance that idea is unconstitutional. Supporters, though, they argue it's simply getting tax dollars into the hands of taxpayers who are funding their students' education in the best way that they see fit. Today was decision day for that bill. Joe Paris details the legislation's fate and why lawmakers made that decision.
It was decision day in the House Education Committee. The Fund Students Not Systems Education Savings Account bill finally got a vote after extended testimony and debate. After hearing from Idahoans on Monday, lawmakers made their final arguments before the vote that would kill the legislation or pass it on to the full House. Bill sponsor Representative Dorothy Moon began defending criticism that her bill would begin to defund Idaho public schools.
The schools are still going to keep quite a bit of it. So we're not hurting the schools, contrary to what some people have said. They are going to be getting money without having those kids in the classroom.
Co-sponsor Representative Gayanne DeMordaunt answered questions about whether the Hope and Opportunity Scholarship would be monitored as closely as public school funds. Parents and lawmakers expressed concerns about the oversight of funds sent to families to support their students' education needs.
Where in this bill would make a private school accountable to all of our taxpayer dollars that we have been requiring for the last 6 years of our public schools? Where's that accountability?
There are audits. There can be an attorney general investigation. Those funds are highly transparent and absolutely audited and reviewed in ways that perhaps not even our traditional public schools are.
A major concern for critics remain constitutional questions about the legislation that would allow public funds to go to private education.
As I read our Idaho Constitution, Section 5, sectarian appropriations prohibited. It's the law of the land. At least in sovereign Idaho it is.
Committee member Representative Barbara Ehart posed a question to Representative Moon about the precedent of a bill becoming law, even if it's in violation of the Constitution.
There's been a concern about religion, and would there be a conflict within our state with the United States Constitution and our Constitution? To your knowledge, do we have any other conflicts within our state that we seem to manage or get through?
Representative Ehart, are you talking about constitutional issues? You mean like marriage? Or are those kind of issues you're talking about that we don't necessarily adhere to? Yes, there's issues that seem to be ignored in our Constitution.
In the state of Idaho, we have things in our Constitution. There's a marriage amendment that is in conflict with the Supreme Court's ruling. So Idaho is in conflict. Our Constitution that we take an oath to is in conflict, and we follow the higher law.
Representative Julie Yamamoto highlighted doubts that even if the program was legal, there appears to be more due diligence needed.
It doesn't inspire confidence to me when some of my questions that I've had and my concerns, well, we have a year to work out the problems. That does not inspire confidence.
In the end, the House Education Committee voted to keep the bill in committee, meaning it will not advance any further for now. The vote was close, with the motion to hold the bill passing 8-7 on the chairman's vote.
Okay, Joe, so a lot of questions alongside with this. I mean, If school funding is dependent on attendance, how can they say that schools will still be funded if students aren't there? But there's also this constitutional question that you were referring to.
Yeah, and I've actually seen a lot of comments online, and people in the Idaho politics world are questioning, oh, well, did Chairman Clow vote to hold the bill in committee because of constitutional questions? And I think that's kind of a leading theory. But Brian, we actually just spoke with Chairman Clow a few minutes ago, and I want to play a clip from him where he explains why he voted to keep the bill in committee. And as we established, it was his vote that was the deciding factor today.
Personally, I don't believe that our Idaho Constitution would prohibit this. I think, in fact, the U.S. Supreme Court has clarified what we can and cannot do in these types of programs. So that was never really an issue for me. And I think that the arguments about that were pretty well settled. Look at the Constitution. I says the Constitution tells us what we must do in education, but it doesn't prohibit us. Well, it used to. It doesn't prohibit us from also offering education savings accounts to students that want a different choice. And that's where I run into the problem. So how do we fund that and not take away from the regular public schools?
And I just spoke with the chairman again a few minutes ago, and the impression I get from him and other lawmakers is that they like this idea and they like the concept, but specifically House Bill 669, it wasn't written in a way and it wasn't created in a way that they think is the perfect way to do this. Someone in committee referred to it as the gold standard. I think that was Representative DeMordaunt, who was the sponsor. Chairman Close says he doesn't think this is maybe the gold standard. He'd like to see a different version of this come. There was concerns, as you heard him refer to, about taking money away from public education, compromising that system. We heard that from other lawmakers, but we will likely see this again, if not a version this year, then next year. The fund students, not systems idea will not be going anywhere, but it'll be interesting to see what it looks like over the next few years.
It's that age-old good idea, but not necessarily a good bill just yet.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Over on the House floor, by the way, it's not often we see both sides of the aisle agreeing on a bill. They did that today, though. House Bill 620. Representative Brooke Green's bill that would ban releasing a mugshot when someone is arrested for a non-violent misdemeanor, then later hospitalized or detained for a mental hold or a mental purpose. First told you about this bill last fall when Representative Green told us she planned to introduce it. She says the bill was inspired by her best friend, Jessica Harrison, who was arrested in 2019 on a misdemeanor charge. Representative Green told us having her mugshot out in public view, well, that took a toll on Jessica's mental health. She later died by suicide. Today, a bill to stop the release of mugshots like Jessica's passed the House unanimously and now heads to the Senate. By the way, if you or someone you know is struggling and needs help, the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All calls, texts are anonymous and confidential. The reaction to Idaho's lieutenant governor participating in a conference run by white nationalists and anti-Semites last week keeps coming. The America First Political Action Conference was created by known white nationalist, misogynist, anti-Semite, and Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. The event was filled with far-right political speeches where attendees cheered Vladimir Putin, celebrated the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and applauded many racist views. On Friday, they played a video from Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin, who apologized for not being there in person in Orlando, Florida. Well, when we asked her about her participation in it yesterday, she couldn't quite distance herself from the event or what was said at the event. But today, the man she's running to replace as governor, Governor Brad Little, well, he managed to distance himself from her without mentioning the lieutenant governor's name. It is extremely unfortunate anyone in elected office in Idaho must make statements like these, but let me be clear, the governor said. I fully reject racism in all its forms. There is no place for racism and hate in the great state of Idaho. As governor, I will continue to stand up for Idahoans' values and work to make our state the place where our children and grandchildren choose to stay, he tweeted out. State Republican Party also putting out a statement about this today, about the views and sentiments of Nick Fuentes in the AFPAC event. White supremacy, anti-Semitism, bigotry, and neo-Nazism are reprehensible and have no place in the Idaho Republican Party. We always have and will continue to stand against these divisive ideologies. The promotion of hatred, bigotry, or the anti-American values of Russia is fundamentally incompatible with our shared conservative ideals and values. That's from Tom Luna, the chairman. Neither one mentioned McGeachin, by the way, but the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights did, and they had this to say. The lieutenant governor has chosen to stand with or speak to those who are in direct opposition to the center's mission to promote respect for human dignity and diversity. To plead ignorance is no defense. As an elected state official, she has both the duty and obligation to represent all the diversity within Idaho. She has abdicated that responsibility. However, McGeehan has refused to abdicate her elected position and will not resign from being lieutenant governor, despite many calls for her to do that. And she stands by her attendance at AFPAC, saying the media is playing a game of guilt by association, but also admitting she didn't look into what AFPAC was before agreeing to participate in it. Plastics were supposed to save us from overusing natural resources. That hasn't turned out so well. Throwing them out or recycling those plastics hasn't either. Some Boise State students started throwing around some ideas, and, well, they could be onto something. Sweet. You don't have to send us a sweet message to get our attention. We take pretty much everything. Questions, comments, criticisms. Just keep them short. We don't want any of that long-form stuff. 208-321-5614. Always include your name and the hashtag the 208 so we know it's for us. And stick around. We could share yours at the end of the show. Plastic waste continues to be an issue. While some are easy to recycle, others not so much. And some methods of recycling can actually leave behind an even bigger environmental footprint than just tossing that plastic into the landfill in the first place. Well, that's where Boise State comes in. A few research students and their professor of material science and engineering, they've created some innovative and environmentally friendly ways to recycle. Now they're looking to take their experiments to an industrial scale. Here's Katya Stepovic.
Yeah, we're not limited by the amount of plastic trash we have at the moment.
Scott Phillips, professor of material science and engineering at Boise State, is no stranger to these orange bags that come from residents across the Treasure Valley to his experimental lab. And what do they do with them?
We take the orange bags and we're purposely not taking anything out of them, meaning we use everything that's in the orange bag. And so we combine all of that together. When it's full, we end up with shreds that look like this. Right? So we have buckets of this now, and for lab testing, we put it into molds, actually, like this one. The two big metal pieces are both hot, and then we put some pressure on it, and it compresses everything down while it heats up the plastic.
Then you end up with a square like this.
Ow.
Not much happens with them after that. For now, at least.
What I would love is to make boards, right? So make different types of boards, give them to construction management students who like to build things, and have them build things like trash cans on campus, benches on campus. I think dorm room furniture could be made from these kinds of things. At the end of the day, when they're no longer needed, we can shred them back up and put them right back in the process.
And that's not the only experiment cooking up on floor 2 in the Micron Center for Material Research building. They're also experimenting with creating their own kind of plastics that can be used over and over again without deteriorating or adding more materials, becoming 100% recyclable in a method that uses low energy. So, how does it work?
We're actually looking at abundant natural compounds as the starting materials. ones that are used in food industry a lot and in the fragrance industry, so they're non-toxic to begin with.
And then, through a cooling method,
we're making polymers in that cold area in there, and ultimately we make enough of them that you get a solid out of that.
And then you get material like this, some flexible and some are harder forms of plastic.
So these aren't beautiful, but they're, it's on the way. Oh! It's okay, don't worry. This one is a brittle one, right?
Sorry.
And that's what we're trying to figure out.
And in their third experiment going on, Phillips and his students use another natural resource to make a different kind of plastic.
We're saying, can we replace certain types of plastics with a new composite material that we're making with sugar as the core to it?
That's right, sugar, which is of ample supply in Idaho.
This is made with sugar.
Yeah. Sugar and then some different additives.
These materials can be made into anything from chess pieces to plastic cups, forks, and knives that you can recycle or throw in your compost.
And this can all be recycled.
And this you can just stick in the ground if you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
It's just, it's natural stuff and it just gets decomposed. It turns out we also can recycle it. So if we were to just grind this up, we could put it right back in the process.
The experiments have been tweaked over the years, and now Phillips and his students are eager to scale this up to mass production as the concern over plastic waste grows.
So while I don't think that any one of these products is going to be the end-all be-all solution to all of our plastics problems, it's fascinating to see just the diverse amount of solutions that are out there, and I think that we can be a big part of that.
What we're trying to replace is all types of plastic with these recyclable plastics, and so I see a future where we have one type of plastic that has a lot of different uses that is easily recyclable.
Phillips says some of these low-energy processes are ready to be taken to the next level.
We have reached that point now where we've sorted out the fundamental features and sorted out the science of how to do it, and so now it's time to scale up.
All right, Katya, we've talked about these orange plastic bags before and kind of how they're going many places. BSU's not getting a whole lot of these, are they?
No, and Phillips actually says he wants to start getting bales of them because right now, majority of the orange bags are still being sent to a company in Utah to be used as fuel for concrete manufacturing. But many think that that process too has too much of an environmental footprint left behind when that method is done. So that's why BSU and the company Bifusion that we did a story on creating that plastic bench in Manitou Park are starting to experiment with low energy ways to recycle. And that's the way people can actually see where the contents inside those orange bags is going. And Professor Phillips says he's already started a company with people outside BSU to take these methods to a larger scale. So we'll have to see what the city does next and what pilot program they pair with.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool. Like you said, benches, building materials. Now we kind of have an idea of when you throw those plastics in those bags, where they actually go. And it's kind of cool that they're being used for, well, stuff to be reused again, I guess.
Yeah, when they break down, just start the process over.
Awesome.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Katya. A big day for our first national park, which turns 150 today. Just a sliver of it sits in Idaho, but we're going to celebrate like we're all in. Might be tough to find a cake to fit 150 candles, but while we try to figure that out, why not take this time to text us? Your comments, your questions, and yeah, your complaints too. Just keep them clean and concise, and make sure to include your name and the hashtag, the 208. Here's the number, 208-321-5614. On this day, in 1872, 150 years ago today, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the law that set aside the area that is Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park. It was meant to preserve and protect the scenery, the heritage, the wildlife, and the geologic and ecological systems. They wanted to keep them in their natural condition 150 years ago so we could enjoy them today. Well, that area, at nearly 3,500 square miles, isn't the largest, but it does cover parts of 3 states. About 1% of Yellowstone, a little more than 22,000 acres of Yellowstone, is in Idaho. It's that little sliver right along the eastern edge of the state. So sure, we can celebrate this sesquicentennial too. Sesquicentennial. 18 years ago, we helped celebrate another Yellowstone milestone, the 100th anniversary of the Old Faithful Inn. That was completed in 1904, built for $140,000, and it was designed by Robert C. Reamer, an elementary school dropout. So we're going to celebrate something that happened 150 years ago today by going back 18 years ago when we celebrated something that happened 100 years before that. It all makes sense in today's math and in today's 208 redial.
Just a quarter-mile away from one of the world's greatest geological wonders stands an architectural marvel.
Just a neat building.
Yellowstone's Old Faithful Inn.
It was just a beautiful building.
And it's 100 years old.
They just used these logs, and it's been standing here that long.
Today's centennial celebration had all the makings of a movie premiere, but the star was already inside.
This is my favorite building in the whole park.
It's a design that still draws attention.
When people come in, first thing they do, they look up.
A very particular gaping look and the eyes upward.
They're just mesmerized because of the 7-story, all log type structure. For as big a structure it is, there's not very many logs holding this up.
Made from materials found in Yellowstone, including the 500 tons of lava rock that make up the 80-foot fireplace, architect Robert Reamer wanted the inn to be a part of the park.
When it was opened, it was touted to be the largest log cabin in the world.
There's a hole in the roof over there, see it?
It may not be perfect,
Right straight over there. See the little hole over there?
but it is perfectly placed.
With Robert Reamer and his design of the Old Faithful Inn, he was providing the comforts the travelers were used to, the electricity, the indoor heat, the indoor plumbing, but he was doing it in such a way that still made them feel a part of the wilderness. And that was what was unique about the Old Faithful Inn.
And the view is not bad either.
The view is not bad.
Pretty good view right out there in front of Old Faithful. The parkitecture, as they call it, of Old Faithful Inn has had a few changes over its 118 years. They added on an east wing in 1913, a west wing in 1927. They almost lost the whole thing in an earthquake in 1959, to a fire in 1988, and numerous attempts to just knock it down and start over. But it remains, thanks to 3 major periods of renovations. There was one in the 80s, another one in the early 90s, and the last one that began in 2004 and lasted about 8 years. The design of the inn was to give visitors a view of Old Faithful from virtually every part of the inn, and that's a live look at it right now. As you see outside of Old Faithful, they're not really scheduled to go off probably for another 20 minutes or so. The Old Faithful guys are still active today. It's slowed down a little bit and become a little less faithful, as it were. Where it once went off every hour, it now is more like every 90 minutes or so. There it is from earlier today. The park, by the way, doesn't open to cars until April 6th. Happy birthday, Yellowstone. All right, final moments of the show. We're having some technical difficulties, but I'm just going to read you some of the text messages we got in today, like this one from David in Boise County. It is parents' rights to send their kids to private schools, but not with taxpayer funds. The vast majority of private schools are not about better quality of learning, math, science, English, but about shielding their kids from other students who are in the wrong color, religion, ethnicity. It's segregation, period, he says. Well, take it from an old Catholic school graduate. Sometimes it is about religion. Everyone makes mistakes. I would hope their elected officials would accept responsibility for those that they make, says Sandy. Still waiting on that. We'll see you tomorrow.